President Trump is beset by crises on all
Supreme Court
sides.
Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died last
A
night.
stunning letter from Speaker.
1:30 this
Did you hear us
community.
say that? That's
Death is coming for all of us someday.
Strike down the Affordable Care Act as it now exists.
What is the strategy that Speaker Pelosi has?
Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Pastor Brandon here, and I'm so glad that you are joining me. We've been in this series called Rock the Boat, and this past week we looked at how we relate to government. It's one of the hardest, most complex issues that we have in understanding politics. So we went right to the Bible and looked at Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. This is what it says. Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authorities except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do you want what is good? And you will have its approval, for it is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason. For it is God's servant and avenger that brings wrath on the one who does wrong. Therefore, you must submit not only because of wrath, but also because of your conscience. And for this reason, you pay taxes, since the authorities are God's servants, continually attending to these tasks. Pay your obligations to everyone, taxes to those who you owe taxes, tolls to those who you owe tolls, respect to those who you owe respect, and to honor those who you owe honor. There's a couple words in here that we just really don't like. It's this word and idea of submission, or to submit. Now, we don't like that because we're Americans. The idea of submitting to those that are governing us is a very difficult idea for us to wrap our head around, or even to submit to. Why is that? One is we're Americans. We're independent. We're free. We really believe that we need to be the masters of our own decisions and our own faith. Another reason why we don't like this is people in general just do not like being under authority. Our sinful nature and hearts rebel against authority, so we don't like it. But I think a very real reason why we don't like this word submit is we actually don't understand what it means. This whole idea of submitting, I'm first going to tell you what it's not, and then we're going to talk about what it is. First, submission is not a value or worth issue. See, when we hear this idea and term submit, we automatically think inferior. Those two are not the same word, submission and inferiority. See, we read that Jesus fully submitted to the Father, that the Holy Spirit is called the helper. A wife is called a helpmate. She's called to submit to her husband, as it says in Ephesians. Does this mean that Jesus doesn't have the same value and worth as the Father, or that the Holy Spirit, who's the helper, doesn't have the same value and worth as Jesus, or a wife doesn't have the same value and worth as her husband? Absolutely not. It's just simply understanding our position. This is not a value or worth issue. Secondly, we also read into this. When we hear the word submit, we think that we cannot think independently or we cannot influence our governing authorities. This is not what it means. Matter of fact, I would encourage you, think independently. Think long and hard and do your homework when it comes to politics. Influence your government how you believe is best. As you read the scriptures and you have a biblical worldview of how the government should be run, I would advocate that all Christians have a responsibility to vote. All Christians have a responsibility to let their voices be heard. All Christians have the responsibility of ultimately influencing government. So to submit doesn't mean you can't think independently. It does not mean that you cannot seek to influence government. And the very last reason why we misunderstand the word submit is we misunderstand who has the ultimate authority. See, we read that the government has been given authority by who? God. So when we're called to submit to the governing authorities, we're ultimately called to submit to God Himself. He's our ultimate allegiance. He is the one who's ultimately in power. And if government ever tries to lead us astray, away from the one true God, then we as Christians have a responsibility to continually submit ourselves to the ultimate authority, and that is God. So, what does submission actually mean then, if we're talking about submitting to governing authorities? Well, it first means that we are people who are under authority, right? We're first under God's authority, and secondly, we're under government's authority. It's a good thing for us to live under authority because it ultimately teaches us how to submit our lives to God. I say this often when it comes to parenting. Kids learn how to listen and obey. Why? Because their parents are authority figures in their life. How do we ever expect our kids to ever learn how to submit to God if they're not willing to submit to the leadership in their very own household? And so we, as adults, as people in this nation, we submit ultimately to authority. It is a coming under authority. And second, we are called to obey as long as it is not sin. So if the government does something that you may not like a ton, but it's still not unbiblical, it still doesn't call us away from the one true God, then we've been called to submit. We can have differing opinions and thoughts, but at the end of the day, Jesus tells us that we should submit to authorities as long as it's in line with Him. And just remember this, at the end of the day, we're always submitting ourselves to God. Even when it's hard, even when we fully don't understand it, as believers, we believe that He is creator of all and we are the created ones. And we've been called to live lives that glorify Him. So I'm going to encourage you today, go and be submissive to God Himself. Love you guys. Hope you have a great Tuesday.